and welcome to Voices of the West. Today I am joined by two prolific authors, curiously, an Englishman and a German, who are both writing about American Westerns, but that's what we're here for. So I'd like to welcome Alfred Wallon and David Whitehead here with us today. Gentlemen, thank you.
Hello,
Thank you.
thank you. That thanks comes from our side. We're happy to talk to you.
Absolutely. So tell me a little bit, how did the two of you get together to start doing a co-write?
Well, I guess Dave, you should begin.
To be honest, I'm trying to remember how it all came about. Basically, what you have to remember is that Alfred and I really came up the same way. You know, we both had fathers who loved the Western. Through our fathers, we developed a love for the Western. And
Yeah,
then, in some weird, strange way, we both kind of fell in love with the same type of Western. So there was a lot of common ground there when we first met each other. Quite apart from the obvious thing as well, that we're both dog lovers. You know, there was a lot of common ground between us. And Alfred had a couple of translations of two of his earlier books. And I think I originally signed on just to smarten them up a bit. I can't remember.
yeah,
But
yeah,
it ended up that
yeah,
I kind of developed parts of the stories, and then we enjoyed it so much that we did two of them. And
yeah. That's right.
now,
We,
now it's about time we did a third and a fourth and a fifth and so on.
Got a good
so here we
relationship
are. Well,
going.
Mm.
well, we started, I guess, in 2008, as far as I remember. Then we had these novels, All Guns Blazing and Cannon for Hire.
Mm.
First written, I wrote, I developed the idea, and Dave made additional chapters and polished it up a little bit, and then
But
we
I think
found out.
that was the key though, that we, because we get along so well, there is no ego there. We share the same goal, which is
Yeah,
essentially to make the best traditional Western that we can make.
yeah,
So you know, if Alfred brings something to the table, or if I bring something to the table, it's all to the common good.
yeah,
There's no ego involved at all,
yeah,
is there?
yeah,
It's just joy. It's pleasure.
yeah. We enjoy the same authors. We grew up with John Benteen, which was Ben Haas. We read his Sundance and Fargo novels, and well, that's what we always have in mind, how he developed storylines. And
Well, I mean, the thing that's, it's interesting that you should say that, because I had read a lot of westerns over the years, and I kind of felt, okay, you know, they're okay, they're entertaining. But when I discovered John Benteen, I remember thinking, this is how a western should be written. And there
yeah,
was just something about the historical accuracy and that great kind of tough style
yeah,
that
yeah,
appealed to me. And I wasn't aware that the same things appealed to Alfred. So
yeah.
really, Alfred, it was a marriage made in heaven for us,
Yes,
wasn't it?
I guess so.
I mean, I
Yes,
don't
and
want anybody to get the wrong idea, but we got along very, very well.
Excellent. So the first of the books that Dusty Saddle is going to be publishing with the two of you is going to be All Guns Blazing, and then it's going to be followed up very quickly after by Cannon for Hire. What can you tell me about those books?
well, All Guns Blazing is a story about the battle with the Comanche at Adobe Walls.
Mhm.
And the hero of that story is a guy named Cal Hennessy, who was a buffalo hunter himself, and he just wanted to visit an old friend at Adobe Walls. And then he's drawn into conflicts with the Comanche and his old friends. And from there, the story develops. And Ben had additional ideas. You know, I drew a picture and he put much color in it. So it was just perfect.
Well, hearing you say that, it reminds me of that old joke. I used to tell people that my great grandfather was killed at the Battle of Little Bighorn. And when people said, really, and I'd say, well, he was camping in the valley next door, and he went over to complain about the noise. And it's such an old chestnut of a joke. But when you said that, Cal Hennessy was going to see his old friend, and it's so true, because he then gets really caught up in this tremendous fight, really, that historically we try to present it exactly as it happened.
Yeah, we thought about what do the people think in Adobe Walls, in this buffalo hunters camp, when they are surrounded by a lot of Comanche. Will they survive? What do they have to do? It was a very tense situation, and we tried to show that feeling.
But you had created a character in there whose family had been killed by the Indians, and it had sent him crazy. Yeah. And I remember that character, the first time I read your draft of the book, that character leapt out at me. I just thought it was such a vivid character, and I think we did him justice in the book.
Yeah,
I really do.
And hopefully the readers will appreciate what we have done. And
fingers crossed. We aim to please.
And the other book, which is called Cannon for Hire, this is just a tribute or homage to Ben Haas, John Benteen, because our Tom Cannon, which is the hero of that series, has much in common with the Fargo character, which John Benteen created. Ben, you can say a little bit more to that, I guess.
Well, I just always felt that John Benteen's series characters, they were, at least to me, they really existed. I mean, it's like some of the characters I've written about before. Nobody can tell me they only exist up there. These people are real to me. And I'm sure you're the same. These people talk to you. They tell you how the story should go, what they would do in a given situation. And so we really just wanted to create some kind of a character who would be our version of Neil Fargo. And again, I think, and of course, the story, it's late on in the 19th century. It's about 1897, roughly.
Yes.
And it takes place in Alaska, which is not a state you would normally associate with a Western. And it just lent itself to that kind of book. And again, I think it worked out very well for us.
Indeed. Yeah, Alaska is always kind of where the sort of gunfighters and gamblers and everybody went after the Wild West got not so wild.
Well, see, this is the thing, though. But when you think about the appeal of the Western largely relies on that idea that a man fends for himself.
Mm-hmm.
That we don't necessarily have to live by the letter of the law. What we have to do is survive the best way we can. And particularly somewhere like Norway, that's got an enormous Western readership. And the reason for that is because in Norway, they still kind of, I'm not talking about the built up parts of Norway, but the remainder of Norway is like a frontier where people have to survive. And so those books tie in with the way some of those people live. And a lot of us would like to go back to those times. We wouldn't necessarily like to visit a dentist in the Old West, but we would be very happy to be known as good people whose word is good. You can take it to the bank. We have a good reputation. We're polite. We're courteous. We stand up for the little guy. These are all wonderful things that are part of the appeal.
Absolutely.
Alfred's going to say, no, it isn't.
No, I think we had also a little guest appearance by Jack London in that book, as far as I remember.
Very true.
Yeah, and because Jack
Alaska
London
not bring Jack London in.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
this is the funny thing. When you do your research and you realize that history is more colorful than you can ever hope to write it. And so, I mean, Alfred and I were talking about this the other day with regard to the different plots, certainly in the series we are about to embark upon, Tales of the Old West, that most, if not all of these, are based on actual historical fact. And so that brings a kind of authenticity to it, and maybe a sense of originality in a way, because these are not stories about another bank robbery, another range war. These are stories that have a much different basis.
And definitely not, it won't be find the readers won't find in our books a hero who rides into the sunset with marrying the rancher's daughter.
Oh, absolutely. Well, but that's the other thing, isn't it? These books, and this goes for the villain as well. These people are not the way they are for no good reason.
Yeah.
There is a reason. Maybe, the bad guy was picked on by his dad when he was a kid. Maybe he grew up mean, and he just decided that it was bite or get bitten, and so he decided to do the biting first. These are all the things that go on in our minds when we create the characters. Otherwise, you just end up with stereotypes.
Yeah, best villain is a fully fleshed human. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to sort of oversell us, but there is so much more. It's a very technical business that you have to consider that you've got the story, then you've got to tell the story at a specific pace, then you've got to make sure that your character here ends up in a very different place by the time he reaches the end. Maybe he's learned a lesson, maybe he's seen the error of his ways, but he's grown as a character. And all these things you have to keep in mind when you do it. And
we have to consider, that the reader sees just the same movie as we see before our own eyes.
Absolutely right. That's right. Well, that's the thing. I mean, the reader pays his money. It's up to us now to give him a good show. And
Indeed.
that's what we try to do. We're not here to mark the numbers. We're here to tell a story that we feel is worth telling.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the readers can learn from these stories a lot of historical information.
Well, generally speaking, all of these stories are morality plays.
Yes, of course.
But although we don't have the guy ride off into the sunset with the rancher's daughter, the good tends to win out at the end. There is justice is seen to be done.
And
so in that regard, it's a morality play, and it assures the reader that what, everything in the world is okay.
And our intention is to tell just fascinating stories to the readers, because a Western is a lot more than a sheriff, a cowboy, outlaws, the typical stuff. There are so many untold stories which someone must write. And I guess we have the intention to fill this gap in a certain way.
Well, it's weird because the first book I ever had published, which was 40 years ago this year, my boss, I was working at the BBC at the time, and my boss made up a little launch party for me.
Yeah.
And he had copies of the book set out, and we had some champagne or whatever it was. I don't think it ran champagne. And various people from the different offices came in, and they said, "Oh, congratulations, David, well done." And I remember one girl, she looked at this book and she said, "It's just like a real book." And I don't understand what she meant, because just because it was a Western, somehow it wasn't a real book. I mean, but really more work goes into some of these books than the average reader might realize. I mean, if you're a Stephen King and you can tell a story in 600 pages, but people like Alfred and I have to tell the story in 90 pages, 150, and there's an art to that.
Yeah.
And we're still trying to learn it, aren't we, Alfred?
Yes, of course. I guess we will never stop learning.
Well, if we're doing it right, we will never stop learning. That's
Yes,
absolutely true.
Well, the general
definitely. Yes.
craftsmanship of writing is a lifelong experience to go through. You keep learning, you keep
Well, you do
improving, you
learn.
keep
You learn
making
all the
what you
time.
did better.
You do, absolutely. I mean, I can remember times when I'd write myself into a corner and I think, oh, I don't know how I'm going to get out of this. This wasn't how I had it set out in my mind. Now, I think we've done it for so long, and between us, we've written so many books that you
Yeah.
kind of know instinctively now what to do, and
Yes.
not to make those mistakes.
Well, if I'm looking back, I started publishing in 1981, which is a hell of a way back in time. It's about 200 novels up to date, and I'm glad and so happy that I never had a writer's block. Never. Not a
Yeah.
single hour,
But see,
not a
this is
single
the
day.
problem with you, Alfred. You're so lazy. This is
Yeah,
the
I
thing.
know. I know.
Only 200 books.
Yeah.
You're
Let's
slipping, my friend.
reach the 500.
I always wanted to write 100. And I think I think it's about 88 now. But I remember people laughing at me, as if 100 was out of reach. I mean,
Well,
you've got prolific authors.
don't forget that you have joined the DSB board, the ship, and you will reach the 100 books sooner than you might imagine.
I certainly hope so. But I mean,
Yeah.
you've known prolific authors. I knew Marshall Grover, and he'd written 746 books. I knew a guy called Paul Wheelahan, an Australian. He'd written over 1,000 books. There were sometimes he could write 3 books a month, every month.
Oh, this is much.
And they were not as bad as you might think. That's the funny thing. I mean, I'm like you. How good can they be? And there were sometimes they were a little bit not quite as good, but overall the quality was not bad. But I just don't have that ability. I'd like to have.
We just hope that we'll still be good and healthy during the next few years because we've got work to do.
I know it.
Yeah.
Yes,
Definitely in range of hitting 100, so we'll get you there.
Yeah. No, I'm all for that. And of course, this is the big thing. A lot of the appeal, at least for me, is the series format, that you collect the series.
Yes.
And it's interesting because I've just spent the last 12 years publishing other people's westerns, and the series has always been far more popular with the readership. We published what I thought were some good standalone westerns, but nobody bought them at all. But this idea that you've got the new Tom Cannon book, that there's a built-in appeal there, I think.
Absolutely.
Well, the readers always want to get familiar with certain type of heroes, and if they enjoy the first book, they will buy also the second book. I've seen that with the Timber novels, which I write with Robert Hanlon now. They've been both in the top 100, and I'm very satisfied with that because I still have to remember that I'm a German. And it is not usual for a German to be in the top 100 in the USA.
No, I get that. And it's the same with me being, an Englishman. But it is unusual, absolutely, for a German. And also for a German to have such a passion for American history.
Yeah.
I remember somebody said to me once, you know more about our history than we do. And this was actually from a history professor who said that. And I think this is the problem. Sometimes, if it's English history, I'm not really that interested. It's my history, and therefore, who cares? But the history of another country somehow is more exciting to me, especially American history. I mean, it's the gift that keeps giving.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm, it really
We
is.
had an interesting moment of time in which we were expanding into all new areas, all new frontiers, and that's not something that every country in the world gets to go through within a short period of time.
Well,
Yeah,
that's true. The story of the push west is just a tremendous story of courage, heroism, excitement, death, fear. It's all those things. And look
yeah,
at the backdrop it's set against. Look at the countryside. You know, where else could you get that?
Yeah.
It's quite amazing to me. It really is. And when you're a kid and you see this kind of thing on television, and then as Alfred will say, you know, your dad takes you to the movies and you see it on the big screen in CinemaScope. Some of
yeah,
us really fall in love with it,
Hmm.
yeah.
and somehow we never quite fell out of love.
Yeah.
You know, it just gets
My dad took me to that genre. He read a lot of westerns, and he
Mm.
always said to me, "Just leave it there. Read a good book." And I waited till he went to work on his shift, and then I got his westerns and dug into it, and then I found out why he loved that.
Well, my dad, he worked shift work, and
Yeah,
sometimes he would work during the night,
yeah,
and during the day, obviously, he would sleep
yeah,
to because he had to stay awake all night.
yeah.
But while I was at school, he would sometimes get our reel-to-reel tape recorder, and he would make up a Western story for me, and he would
Mhm.
burst balloons to simulate gunfire, or he would
Uh-huh.
say, you know, the outlaws crossed the creek, and he would
Yeah,
wiggle his fingers in a bowl of water to make it seem like the horses were crossing
yeah,
the river or whatever.
Got a
And
good
so
radio
when you
man.
look at it that way, it's no wonder you end up the way Alfred and I ended up,
yeah.
really.
But I'm mighty proud that I went into that direction. And as I said before, there is a lot of work in store for us. There's a lot of work still to do, and we're proud to do that.
I would agree with that. I am incredibly proud to be associated with the Western.
Yeah,
I really am. I think it's when you look back, and as we say, we're talking about 40 years or more. I mean, I can remember writing my first Western. It never got published, obviously, but I was about 11. It was the
yeah,
first book I ever typed. I
mhm,
used to peck at the keyboard,
yeah,
and it was it was never a chore because in your mind you could see, you could feel the desert sun, you could,
mhm.
you know, you could hear the howling Apaches. It was just a wonderful way to grow up.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Indeed. So, with the entire series we're starting up here, what's coming up for the future after these in the
We
co-writes between you all that we can expect coming down the line here, and that gets us towards book 100 for you, Dave?
Yeah, we thought about a series which is called Tales of the Old West. These are all standalone novels, but most of them are based on historical facts. I had a rough storyline already written, and I sent a few novels to David, and he looked at it and said, "Well, that's the kind of thing we could work on." And we are starting right now with a railroad novel,
Ah,
two of them, one with the Union Pacific and the other with the Central Pacific, just to show how they worked, what dangers they had to face. And David found that interesting, and we will connect these novels all together under the series name Tales of the Old West. There are nearly a dozen, which will keep us occupied for a couple of days, David, or is it more weeks or months?
Or maybe an afternoon. But of course, one of the interesting things to me, and this I think is something that makes Alfred and I dovetail very neatly together, is that Alfred has the ability to tell a story very quickly. He doesn't mince words. He just tells the story. Then I come in and I add what you might call detail, description, maybe. And so between us, we end up painting a different picture. But in this series, every book is really, it begins with a man talking to his grandson, and then he tells the
Telling
story.
the tales.
So this is the linking theme. But the interesting thing is the readers will get two stories for the price of one, because as they read through the series, they will see what happens to the grandfather and the grandson as the stories progress. And these are nothing to do with the main story, but it's something in there that I don't think has been done before.
They're changing
And
the
this is
process of telling the stories. Yes, that's fascinating.
and this is
Yeah,
the
I mean,
connection.
I think people will buy into this because there'll be a nice relationship between the grandfather and the grandson. But punctuating that, you get a rattling good story in between. So I'm really pleased with the way this is starting to shape up. I'm not just saying that in the hope that we'll sell a few extra copies. I really genuinely mean this. This is a great series to be associated with.
And I'm absolutely sure that, David, you will soon find out that Nick Whale is a marketing expert par excellence. And
I see. So now you're a German who speaks French as well as English and
yes,
writes about America.
A bit, yes.
Yeah.
And
Well,
and DSP will support this series by various occasions. Also, by this means, at the moment, there will be TikTok videos, there will be articles on the DSP website. So the readers will very soon learn what this series is about, I guess. Am I right, Kevin?
Absolutely. Look, a very fascinating new project we're getting going on here. And yes, we have social media, we have interviews, we have all kinds of things that we throw towards this, but basically getting you out there in front of viewers to be able to pick up books and buy more.
this has always been the problem, isn't it? You know, if people don't know the books are there, how can they buy them?
The fascinating thing is with DSP is it's just you're a member of a very good family.
I already, and again, I'm not just saying this. I already feel that way. I had somebody say to me the other day, he said, I understand you've joined Dusty Saddle, you know, welcome aboard. And I thought that was really nice. I really did. But it's an interesting thing. Everything relies on promotion. And I saw something today. I don't know how I ended up on this particular message board. Do they still call them message boards? All of this stuff was 6 years up, 6 years old. And this guy was complaining. He said, you know, I've published my book. He didn't say today. He said Toady. He said, I've published my book Toady, and no sales are showing up yet. I'm really sick and tired of this. And somebody had to remind him. They said, well, does anybody know you've published this book? What have you done to promote this book? You know, and unless you are that terrible word, proactive, unless you are proactive, if people don't know the product is out there, you can't blame them for not buying it.
Yeah, it's
I always say to other fellow writers or interested readers, the most thrilling things and the real hard work begins after you've written the work, the end. Then the sales process have to start. Then the social marketing activities have to start. And I'm doing that also on my Facebook site. I'm posting each day something which might be interesting for the readers, just to keep things running and going.
That's I mean, again, you know, there was that old piece of advice: the hardest book you will ever write is not the first one, but the second one. Because when you write your first book, you put everything into it, and then, as you say, you write the end, and you sit back, and then you think, oh, I've got to do the next one now. and
Yeah.
it becomes very difficult. It gets a little bit easier, I think, but
Yes, of course.
that second one is always the tough one.
Yeah.
But this is a different time.
And as soon as your name gets familiar to the readers, things are getting easier.
Well, it's that old chestnut, isn't it? That the harder you work, the luckier you get. You know, and you can't just sit back and hope. You have to take your fate in your own hands, or you get somebody like David to.
Yes, waiting for miracles is only around Christmas season, I guess.
I think you're right.
Well, if you're spending 20 years of hard work to be an overnight success.
Absolutely true. It's really true, isn't it? I mean, and I remember, again, many years ago, somebody had written a book, had written a Western, and I was part of some Western message board, and he had said, would anybody out there like to read my book and tell me if they like it? And nobody offered. So I said, yeah, okay, send it to me. I read this book, and it was like going back to the days of the silent Western. It was one cliche after another.
Mm-hmm.
And I said this to him as diplomatically as I could. Mm-hmm. And he replied, he just came back and said, well, I might as well give it up then. And I never heard from him again. And you can't take it personally. No. You just can't take it personally.
I guess just you have to believe in what you're doing and how you're doing it. I consider myself being on a mission for more than 40 years now, because in Germany the Western market is very small. Famous authors are no longer with us. So what the hell do I have to do? I must do it, otherwise this genre is dying out over here.
Well, again, and a lot of people who have written Westerns in the past have just moved on. They said, well, okay, that was then, this is now. Now I'm going to write horror or science fiction or romance. I've done some romances, and I think Alfred has too.
Yes.
But, there is such a sincere love for the Western that we can't let it go quietly. We just can't do it.
And I just want to show the readers, especially over here in Germany, that Karl May is anything else than historical Western. I consider it always romantic fairy tales.
But don't you find, though, that a lot of people judge the Western based on Karl May?
Yes, they do. And they still
really
do,
don't they? Yeah.
But we normally live now that younger generations even do not know who John Wayne was or Clint Eastwood.
It's sad, isn't it?
That's a sad world we live in.
It is a sad world, yeah. And on that note, let's try and end.
Looking forward to the series coming along here from y'all. Where can people learn more about all of you?
Alfred?
Well, I'm on Facebook. I have a website. Anybody can contact me via Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I've also done some TikTok videos, and all my books are listed on Amazon. I guess this goes also for you, Ben.
Yeah, well, Alfred's younger than me, you see, so I'm old fuddy-duddy. You can go to me if you just Google Ben Bridges Western Writer. You'll find the website that tells you everything you need to know about me.
Well, I thank you both for joining us today. Unfortunately, we're short on time for recording on this, but a pleasure, and I am looking very much forward to the entire series of books coming out. It sounds like a great formula.